The first time I noticed her, it wasn't because she was beautiful. It was because she laughed when no one else did. It was early. Too early for anyone to find anything funny. The cafe smelled like overworked espresso and burnt toast. A small radio murmured old jazz through static. I was at my usual table by the window, laptop open, pretending to write. She was sitting a few seats away, across from a woman who looked like she had opinions about everything. They were mid-conversation when the older woman, her aunt, I'd later learn, said something sharp but playful, and the woman laughed. A warm, low sound, like she hadn't let herself do it in a long time. Heads turned. Mine stayed turned longer than it should have. The aunt noticed me first. Her eyes flicked toward me with a kind of teasing approval, before she leaned closer to her niece, and whispered something. The woman followed her gaze, then looked away quickly, brushing a crumb from her sweater. I tried to look busy again. Typed a few words I didn't mean, deleted them. When they left, she held the door open for her aunt and glanced back at me. A polite smile, nothing more. Still, the silence she left behind felt heavier than the chatter that replaced it. The next morning, she came in alone. She ordered a cappuccino, no sugar, and sat in the same chair her aunt had taken yesterday. I didn't mean to look up when she passed me, but I did. "You're here early again," she said softly, mostly to herself. I gave a small shrug. "Bad habit," she smiled at that. The kind of smile that starts in the eyes, not the mouth. Then she took out a small notebook, folded open to a blank page, and started writing. Her pen moved slowly, deliberately. I watched the steam rise from her cup and disappear into the light. The radio played something from the 80s, guitar soft, lyrics forgettable. Every time she paused, I wondered what she was thinking about. Over the next week, it became routine. She'd arrive around 8. I'd already be there. We didn't talk much, but we began to acknowledge the coincidence. A shared glance, a small nod. Sometimes she'd catch me looking. Sometimes I'd catch her looking first. She remembered my order before the barista did. One morning, when the barista forgot to add sugar, she slid the sugar jar toward me without looking up. Just a small movement of her hand. "Thanks," I said. "Someone should keep you from falling apart before 10 a.m., she murmured. Her tone was dry, amused, but her eyes stayed on her notebook, as if she'd said something she hadn't planned to. I laughed quietly. "That's kind of you." I didn't say it was kindness. She smiled without lifting her head. The next day, she didn't come. I stayed longer than usual, pretending to work but mostly just waiting. The barista wiped down the counter twice. The radio played through an entire playlist. By the time I finally packed up, the table she usually took was already cleaned, a single napkin folded neatly in the center. The way she used to leave it, I almost took it with me. I didn't. Outside, the air smelled like rain that hadn't started yet. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from an unknown number. "My aunt said you remind me how fun trouble can be. Don't make her write." I stared at the text until the screen dimmed. The rain began, slow at first, then certain. I turned around and looked through the cafe window, half expecting her to appear. She didn't. But the napkin was still there, right where she'd left it. She came in the next morning with the same quiet determination, but something in her shoulders was lighter. Maybe it was the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, or the way she lingered at the counter before choosing a table. I noticed, and tried not to notice. "You like it strong?" she asked, pointing to my usual black coffee. "Always," I said, surprised she even remembered. She nodded, and for a moment, the space between us felt smaller. She sat across from me, placing her cup down with a gentle clink. I fiddled with my sleeve, not wanting to say anything foolish. The cafe hummed around us. The hiss of the espresso machine, a chair scraping, someone muttering a greeting to the barista. "I used to drink tea instead of coffee," she said suddenly, almost to herself. Until life got loud." She didn't explain further, but I imagined a house emptying of children, mornings that stretched too long, divorce papers folded like knives. I nodded. "I get that." She glanced at me then, a little startled by my response. Her eyes softened, just slightly, before she looked away. I wanted to reach across the table and brush the steam from her cup, but I didn't. Instead, I just folded the napkin in front of me, again. I imagined scenarios I didn't want to have. Her laughing at something I said. her hand brushing mine accidentally, her saying something I shouldn't hear. The age difference pressed against every line of my thoughts, the unspoken risk of someone noticing, someone misunderstanding. We didn't speak for a while. We just sat. I watched the way she stirred her coffee, slow, deliberate, as if each rotation was a tiny meditation. I watched her hands, the subtle knuckle movement when she paused mid-thought, the way she would glance up, scanning the room without really scanning it. Then she picked up her pen and started to write. I wanted to ask what, but instead I asked if she needed sugar. She looked up, a little startled, and shook her head. Not today. I nodded, pretending to look at my laptop, but I could feel her gaze lingering on me. Quietly, without words, we were threading something fragile between us, curiosity, a hint of recognition, and maybe a shared understanding of what loneliness could feel like. As she stood to leave, she paused at the edge of the counter. She glanced at my cup, then at my eyes. She tilted her head just slightly and said, almost teasingly, "Don't drink it all at once. Bad habits die hard." I laughed quietly, not because it was funny, but because it felt intimate in the way only small gestures can be. She walked out, and I didn't move. Her words stayed with me. I didn't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. And when the door closed behind her, I realized I had been holding my breath without noticing. I spotted her before she noticed me, as usual, leaning against the counter like she owned the quiet hours of the morning. She had that half smile on, the one that didn't reach all the way, the one that made me wonder if she was joking or just tolerating me. I stood in line, rehearsing something I could say, but my words kept evaporating before I got to the counter. When I finally made it to her table, she had already taken out her notebook, pen poised. She looked serious, different than yesterday. "You're late," I said, though it was barely a question. She didn't look up. "Traffic," she muttered. Then she paused, thumb tapping against the paper. Or maybe I just forgot. Her hands moved too deliberately, folding a napkin, brushing crumbs from the edge of the table. I wanted to reach out, just lightly, maybe to steady her hand, maybe to make sure she was still there. But I didn't. I tried small talk. "Coffee good," she hummed, not really answering. Then she paused, glancing toward the door like she expected someone. That someone never came, but the glance was enough. Her alertness made me uneasy, made me feel like she was guarding something I didn't get to see. I thought about leaning closer, just a little, to share the warmth from my coffee, to make my presence felt. But her hand lifted first, and she rearranged her sleeve over her wrist. A subtle barrier, almost unconscious. Did your aunt mention me again?" I asked, quietly, almost hoping she wouldn't answer. She looked up sharply. She said what she said," she murmured, voice tight. Then she forced a small smile. "That's all." I nodded, swallowing a sudden lump in my throat. Words failed me. I wanted to say, "I don't care what she said, I care about what you feel." But I didn't. The bell above the door jingled, and a man I didn't know walked in, carrying a canvas bag stuffed with books. He waved at her, she waved back politely, and for a split second, I felt like an intruder in my own thoughts. I watched her hands tremble slightly as she poured the last bit of coffee into her cup. My own hands fidgeted on the table, drumming a quiet rhythm, trying to measure whether I should stay or leave. Then, almost by accident, our eyes met. For a long second, longer than it should have been, I could see the hesitation there. Her worry about what this could be, my worry about what she already knew. I wanted to say something. I wanted to lean in, to close the small distance. But the pen in her hand lifted, her elbow brushed against mine, and then she looked down. Just a glance, almost nothing, but it was enough. A near confession, a near touch, a near everything that mattered. I breathed out slowly, pretending to sip coffee. The quiet between us was heavier than the words we didn't say. The evening air was cooler than I expected. She had left the cafe early, and I had followed, not meaning to, just drawn by the quiet pull of the streetlights and the sound of her heels clicking against wet pavement. We didn't speak for the first few blocks. I stayed a step behind, half wondering if I should slow down, half wondering if she wanted me to. Her coat was too big, sleeves hanging over her hands, and she kept tugging at it like she wanted some invisible shield between us. "I hate when it rains," I said finally, more to break the silence than because I really believed it. She glanced at me. A small tilt of her head, nothing more. Then she shrugged. I like it sometimes. Makes things quieter. I imagined her in a house alone, listening to rain on the roof, maybe thinking about someone she used to know, someone she used to be. It made my chest tighten in a way I didn't want her to see. We stopped at a bench under a street lamp. She sat first, folding her hands over her lap. I remained standing, shifting my weight, trying to find a way to say the thing I'd rehearsed in my head for hours. I think about you, I said finally, voice low, almost embarrassed. The words felt clumsy, too small for what I meant. She didn't answer right away, just stared at the ground, tracing a line in the damp pavement with her toe. You shouldn't, she said quietly. I laughed, a little sharp because I wanted to argue because it hurt. I know, but I do anyway. Her shoulders shifted. She looked up, eyes meeting mine. Vulnerability edged with restraint. There was something in that look, something I hadn't seen before, fear, maybe guilt, maybe a mix of both. You don't understand, she said softly. Her hands gripped the edge of the bench. I can't, I shouldn't. I stepped closer, just a little, careful not to overstep. I don't care. Not about rules. Not now. Her lips parted, but no words came. She swallowed, blinking fast. I could see her pulse in her neck, the small tremor in her hands, and for a fleeting second, it felt like she might tell me everything, or let me cross whatever invisible line we'd been circling for weeks. Then she leaned back, almost imperceptibly, as if the weight of her own thoughts pushed her away. I didn't move. We just sat there. The rain faint now, the streetlights flickering in shallow puddles. I wanted to reach out, to touch her hand, to hold her gaze. But even imagining it made me pause. Something fragile hovered between us, more delicate than either of us could risk breaking. Do you ever stop thinking? I whispered, though wasn't clear if I meant about me, about her, about the idea of crossing that line. She didn't answer. Not yet. I went to the cafe the next morning, hoping to see her, hoping for the easy rhythm of our silent acknowledgement, but the table she always claimed was empty. The napkin neatly folded in the center, untouched, as if she'd never existed. I ordered my coffee and sat by the window anyway. The barista glanced at me, raising an eyebrow, but didn't ask questions. I stared at the steam rising from my cup, tracing the curls as if they could tell me where she was. She hadn't texted. I didn't expect her to, but still nothing. Later, I heard from someone I didn't know. A soft, hesitant voice calling her a mother. A child. I wasn't sure if I'd misheard. Maybe it was someone else. Maybe it didn't matter. But the words settled in my chest like stones. I imagined mornings with her, quiet and weighted with small responsibilities I hadn't known existed. I imagined trying to step into a life already full. The thought made my throat tight, my palms restless. I wrote a message half finished, about missing her, about wondering if she was okay. I didn't send it. I rewrote it 3 times, then deleted it entirely. My thumb hovered over the screen longer than it should have, then I put the phone down. Days passed. I showed up at the cafe at the same time. Sometimes she was there, sometimes not. When she was, she avoided my eyes, tucked herself into her corner like she was hiding, even when the cafe was nearly empty. I imagined every scenario. Did she see me and choose not to come over? Did she feel guilty? Did she need space? Did she even care? I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. One afternoon, I lingered after closing. The chairs were stacked, the lights dim. Her notebook lay abandoned on her usual table. I picked it up briefly, saw her handwriting, neat, meticulous, and then replaced it, careful not to disturb the faint imprint of her presence. Outside the sky was gray, soft rain threatening. I debated leaving a note, slipping it under the counter, anything to remind her I existed. But I couldn't. I stepped back, swallowed, and walked away. The door clicked shut behind me, and the seat she always took remained empty. I didn't expect to see her again so soon. She appeared at the cafe late afternoon, the door swinging open, damp hair sticking lightly to her forehead. I was stacking chairs, half hoping, half dreading. She paused at the counter, hesitated, then walked toward me. She didn't speak at first. Her coat was damp, her bag heavy. I noticed the small things, her shoelaces untied, her fingers trembling slightly as she set the bag down. I didn't mean to disappear. she said finally, voice soft, like it might break if she pushed it too hard. I nodded, unsure if I should say something. I didn't want to overstep. It's okay, I said, quiet, though it didn't feel okay at all. We moved to the back, where the cafe stored the overflow of chairs and boxes. The space was dim, smelled of coffee and polish. We didn't sit at first. We just stood there, breathing in sync, hands occasionally brushing against shelves or counter edges, as if even the smallest contact could fracture everything. I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered. "You didn't," I said. But I wasn't sure if that was true. Not entirely, I just wanted her to hear it. She glanced down, fiddling with the zipper of her bag, then lifted her eyes toward mine. The vulnerability was there, raw, like an unfinished sentence. I imagined the stories behind her eyes. What she didn't say about mornings with a child, evenings spent alone, the weight she carried silently. I thought, maybe we shouldn't, she admitted, voice barely audible. I thought maybe, her words trailed off. I didn't finish them for her. I reached out lightly, brushing the damp hair from her temple. It was nothing really, just a touch, tentative, careful. But she didn't pull away. We stayed like that for a long moment. The quiet between us was heavier than the words we'd exchanged all week. And yet, in that heaviness, there was a kind of understanding, a recognition that we'd crossed a line in thought, if not action, and that acknowledgement itself was enough for now. She let out a slow breath. I let my hand fall. We stood in silence. The cafe smelled of coffee, and faint rain lingered on the windows. Finally she smiled. "Smolf. Okay," she said. "Okay," I repeated, not because anything was resolved, but because it felt human, felt enough for this moment. And that was it, simple, fragile, honest. No fireworks. No declarations. Just two people who had recognized each other, risked a step, and survived the quiet tension that came after. Weeks passed. Not like in a storybook sense, not with declarations or grand gestures, just ordinary days. She came to the cafe at the same time every morning. I was there before her, black coffee in hand, a notebook open though rarely touched. One morning, I arrived at 8:47 a.m., my usual table by the window waiting. She came in, tucked her damp hair behind her ear, smiled that quiet smile. No words, just a nod, it was enough. We fell into rhythm again. She brewed her tea, I sipped my coffee. Sometimes we talked about nothing. Other times, she told me about a morning with her child, or a book she liked. She'd laugh softly, and I'd watch the way the corners of her eyes crinkled, memorizing small details without meaning to. The bench outside the cafe became ours in a way that didn't need explanation. We sat there occasionally, sharing silence, letting the city hum around us. I learned the weight of her presence. How it could fill a space without pressing, how it could quiet my own restless thoughts. She didn't always share everything, and I didn't always ask. We existed in the space between what was said and what was understood. The previous tension, the near confessions, the unsent messages, all of it had settled into something steady, warm, grounded. One evening, after closing, she lingered at the doorway. I held the door, half expecting her to slip away again. Instead, she stayed a second longer than necessary, fingers brushing mine lightly as she reached for her coat. That touch, small, fleeting, said more than any word could. I realized then that our closeness wasn't loud or urgent. It was quiet, patient, deliberate. We carried our routines into each other's lives in subtle ways. Coffee shared over morning papers. Tea sipped together while rain pattered on the windows. A laugh at something only we found funny. I watched her fold napkins, she watched me stir my cup, nothing dramatic, everything essential. And in the quiet of that familiarity, I understood this was enough. The waiting, the almost moments, the whispered hesitations, they weren't failures. They were the architecture of connection, the scaffolding of something lasting. As we closed up the cafe one rainy afternoon, I noticed the napkin she had folded earlier, resting next to my cup. I picked it up, smiled faintly, and set it aside. She noticed, she smiled back. That shared understanding, a private language between us, felt like home. I sipped my coffee, she adjusted her scarf, and in that simple exchange, I felt something I hadn't before: peace.